Hi, I'm Lizzie Hershberger. I grew up in an Amish community and I have wrote a book and I have survived many kinds of abuse and here I am today. I was born into the Swartzentruber Amish. My mother actually had left the Amish community for a short period of time and she got pregnant with me. She went back to the community and so I grew up my entire life in an Amish community in Minnesota, and I was so sheltered. So as I was growing up, I had a mom and a dad, and I was the oldest sibling. And we actually lived right next door to my grandparents. They had about 15 to 20 cows, and we would milk the cows by hand, and then we would put it into these cans, and then we would pump water to cool the milk off before the milkman came. The milkman came every morning, and he would pick up the milk, and that's the way many Amish in my community made a living. What I knew growing up was, I just worked. I worked my entire childhood. That's all we ever did. The only day we didn't work was Sundays. Technically, I always say this, the women did not get Sundays off. We still cooked 3 meals a day. We still prepared food. We still prepared if we were getting company or if we had church at our home. So unfortunately, I don't have a starting date of when I was abused because I believe it happened before I have memory. So I have no memory of never being abused by my uncles. And as I got older, it did eventually end. I had a couple little cousins that unfortunately died in a fire, and it ended because both my uncles got married. And then 14-year-old girl, that's when I got, it's a whole process of getting groomed and everything, and I eventually got raped multiple times, and it did end up in court almost 30 years later. But I had diaries that I could turn over to the law enforcement and they could actually look at it. But as a young child, I was groomed. That's what happened in our community. I hate to say this, but every community has their own kind of issues. And in my community, everybody, to my knowledge, raped their hired girls. And that the hired girls are the ones, I was a hired girl. My abuser that got sentenced, he had 4 children, he was married, but that's what happened. I could tell you over 50 people in my community that has a story of being a hired girl and getting raped. I don't have a memory of exactly when it started. I have a memory of when it ended, but I can just point out one of the incidents. My grandparents lived right next to us. And one of my uncles would ask me to come down and join him in the horse barn. He would grope me. There was a name for a radio, which was called the Mallard Duck. And the radio, remember, we had no modern conveniences, but back in those days, you would have a radio you could put some batteries in. So he would entice me with, well, if you let me do this to you, I will let you listen to the radio, which was the Mallard Duck. Just go on from there. It's always just the touching and the, doing things to me. But it was always rewarded with, if you don't tell, then I'm going to let you listen to the Mallard Duck. And the crazy thing is, that I will add to this, is actually to this day, my uncle has never been charged because he denied what he did. He knows what he did. If he were to listen to this and say that the Mallard Duck, he knows what the Mallard Duck. I mean, he enticed me with that. That was the Mallard Duck with the radio. I've never heard of it being used before. But then as I got older, I got to the age of about 9. Then, unfortunately, my little cousins died in a house fire. And right after that, I had 2 uncles. They both got married to sisters, actually. And so it ended. So I thought, oh my goodness, my life is fine now. But then unfortunately, when I turned 14 is when I went and worked for my neighbors who were friends of my mom and dad's. And it was a married guy. Hindsight now, I was being groomed. I mean, he started doing all kinds of things. And about 6 months later, I got raped. And it happened over and over. And people often ask me or tell me, You can't be raped that many times, but yes, you can, because you've already been groomed, and I'm 14 years old. The married guy was 28 years old and a member of the church, and my entire life I was taught to listen to elders and obey to what they say you should do, so I did that. I just did what he told me to do. When I graduated from Amish school, 8th grade, I went to work for my neighbors. I was 14 years old, and he groomed me for a period of months, and eventually he raped me multiple times over a period of time. It didn't even ever occur to me to share it with my mom or authorities or anybody, because I was taught to listen to your elders and listen to who you were working for. So that's what I did. The unfortunate effects from the trauma that I experienced from being raped, then I became very promiscuous. And I eventually got, my mom kicked me out of basically our home, had me live outside of the community. But everything was my fault because, see, I, as the 14-year-old, must have enticed this married man to cause this sort of, episode. That's what they called it. It was all my fault. So I left the community, and, people called me all kinds of names, and they still call me that to this day, because I became a promiscuous teenager. Therefore, I must have been enticing this married man. Remember, he was 28 and I was 14, to do this to me. I was never taken to the police. I was never taken to, have a rape kit done or nothing. Actually, what my mom did, she took me to this facility that dealt with people that had trauma, which was not even trauma. In my mom's defense, my mom at age, I was a 14 still, almost 15, she just didn't, I don't know if she didn't know how to handle it. Obviously, she didn't take me to the police, but she had me leave, and she sent me with some relatives that lived in another state. And then 6 months later, I came back, and the community pretended like I had never left and just acted like, oh, she's back, like I was at some treatment center. And I did. I really did think I was going to be an Amish, get married Amish. And I joined the Amish young folks. I started attending communion services to get baptized, and actually became an Amish teacher. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. But then one day, my sister said, I'm leaving. She said, I can't stay Amish. And she was 16 and I was 17 at that time, and I left with her. And that's what we did. It's very difficult for me to actually talk about the emotions and the things that I went through. The rapes and the abuse was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. But the community shunning me and ridiculing me and telling me how I was the person that enticed this, and how they turned their back on me. They told me all kinds of bad things. I think that is still the worst part of it all. No community member ever came to me and said, my goodness, I am so sorry what happened to you. All they did is turn their back on me and said that I enticed him. I was 14 years old. I didn't entice him. I don't care what I would have done. I did not entice him. He's a grown man. He needs to stand responsible, including my uncles. My uncles were adults. I was a little child. I think one of the things is that I still live by the community, and I still see these things happening. I often get brought in as consulting services. And I think if the Amish community in itself would just come forward and say, you know what, we have some problems here, let's try to fix it. But no, they blame the victims and the survivors for enticing these adult men to do these things. It's not a child's fault, or a teenager's. My goodness. So yes, eventually when I did leave for the second time with my sister, it was a process. Like, I remember the first time we put makeup on, or we went to some festival. Like, it took years. Like, you didn't just leave the community and leave everything behind. Like, it took years to feel free. Even to this day, there's still certain times when I'm around certain people from that community, I can feel myself getting, I don't know the correct words for it. But I can feel myself gravitating back to that because that's all I ever knew. That's what I knew. I knew that they would say, if you ever leave this community, you're going straight to hell, and you should never talk about anything that happens there. Well, I talk about it all the time. And so I get so much backlash. And the biggest backlash, I always tell people, is not even from the people that are still in the community. It's from the other former Amish that have left. And they tell me, you can't talk about that stuff, because they choose not to talk about that. They choose not to report it. They choose. I know lots and lots and lots of former Amish from my community, from multiple communities, who would never have went to the police, never reported their case. They will never write a book. They will never write a story, because they're still attached to that. And they still have not adjusted to the fact that the only way you will heal, you have to share. I unfortunately was in a very, very bad ATV accident, and I got laid up for many, many, many months. And I had started writing, and my initial 7 years ago, I actually started writing, and I just was planning to just journal. I've journaled my entire life. So I started writing, and I started writing, and I started writing. And then I actually decided to join this group, and I became a co-founder of a Voices of Hope group. And what we encourage people is to share your story. So I was writing away, and all of a sudden I was at this conference, and I was like, this is crazy. I am writing my story. I am doing all these things, and I'm telling everybody else what to do, but I've never went to the police and just reported what happened to me. I made an appointment with the local police, and I said, I just want to share my story. I said, I don't know what's going to happen. And he said, over 20 years that I've lived in this community, nobody has ever come forward and shared their story. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is crazy, because I knew all these other stories. So anyways, then I kept writing and writing. Eventually, I got in contact with somebody, and they're like, you know what? This book could really, instead of writing it about, because my purpose was to write to find my biological dad. And they said, no, you need to write it, you could really influence. And then same time, then my abuser, one of my abusers, not my uncle's, he got charged in Fillmore County, Minnesota. You can look up the documents. He got charged. He took a plea offer. And the reason that he got charged is because I had these diaries from when I was a young Amish teenager. And I could verify. I had scribbled in, on the dates. So in my diary, I had actually made distinguished red marks, red circles. I knew what it meant. I had not looked at it in about 25 years, but when I had went in and reported my case, I went back and found my diary, and I was like, this is what I had done. So that's how I could distinguish on how many times it was. But unfortunately, that's where I've gotten ridiculed so much on, is that it was over 25 times that I was raped. Then the community said, well, you can't get raped that many times. I have documents out there, said, that can't happen. But what they don't understand is the grooming process and the whole, just remember, I was 14, he was 28. So 7 years ago, I started writing, and I think just the process of coming forward and sharing my story, then I put everything together in a book, and I published it, and this is 3 years later. The book is on Amazon. You can find it, and it has a lot of my childhood, my certain things that happened, but it has a lot of details about my diary, my, just my life story is in the book. Yeah, so the process of coming forward and reporting my abuser, and he got charged, I did eventually publish my book. My book was more to share my whole story. And it talks about my uncles. My uncles were not charged in any way because of the statute of limitations, and they also denied it, but they still live in the community. I have a whole section in my book talking about the whole case, but I really encourage everybody to read it. And 3 years later, my book sells on Amazon extremely well. It's on Audible, Kindle, all kinds of versions. Through the writing of my book and sharing it. That's how I really got into the advocacy work. I was encouraged through my community and my mother to keep a journal, to keep a daily log. That's how my abuser got sentenced. I mean, he really did. When he finally got confronted by the sheriff in our local community, he did. He confessed. He owned up to what he did, and he actually admitted, it's on audio, that most likely everything that I stated is probably true, because I do have it on diaries in my journals. So going through everything, I decided to go ahead and publish my book. It's called Behind Blue Curtains, and to my knowledge, I am the only former Amish that testifies as an expert witness. Often many other people can testify on behalf of the Amish, but nobody is an actual former expert on the Amish. I just want people to know that Amish are just, they're people. There's great, wonderful Amish people, but they're just like everybody else. There are some bad apples in there, and please just treat them like everybody else. Don't give them Amish perks. That's what I call them, Amish privileges. Just treat them like everybody else. If you see something, say something. Don't, oh, they're Amish, so let's not. No, they govern themselves. No, report them, do a welfare check, do everything that you would if it was a non-Amish person. I encourage other survivors of any kind of abuse, whether you come from the Amish or plain, find somebody that you can talk to. Find somebody, a counselor or a therapist, or reach out to an advocate. Reach out to somebody that can just listen to your story. It doesn't mean you have to publish a book, but just reach out to somebody and tell them your story, and you will find so much healing and sharing. Don't keep your abuser's secret. I would just encourage anybody coming from whatever religious organization you come from. If you have experienced something that you don't quite understand or it feels uncomfortable, please just share with somebody. Share your story. Share something. Talk to somebody. Your show will have the links below. Just share that there's so many people that could, like come around and support you and will understand you.